on her issues here.
Okay, certainly want to welcome everybody. Appreciate you being available for this conference call. I did want to apologize on the front end. We've got an extensive agenda for our conference call. We normally try to limit these conference calls to one or two items that is absolutely essential that we handle before the next regular meeting. And this time we had a number of items sneak up on us. And like I said, I apologize on the front end for having so many items here. We will in the future make a strong effort to try to keep conference call agendas a lot briefer than the one we've got planned for today. So with that, if we could follow the roll, please. Casey, got that? Or?
Yep, Casey's here. Mr. Ralston.
Here.
Ms. Chansey. Mr. Edwards.
Here.
Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Wiseman.
Here.
Mr. Cobbins. Ms. Kim.
Here.
Ms. Hartgrove. Ms. Tucker.
Here.
Mr. Balcom.
Here. Okay, we do have a quorum present. Hopefully, maybe Lillian, and I guess we're expecting some of the others to join us, but we do have a quorum present, so we will move forward.
Sounds like we have one person join us.
Lillian Hartgrove here.
Okay, welcome,
Good
Lillian.
morning. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a quorum present. The first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda for the meeting. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. This is
And
Lillian.
that's Lillian. Okay.
Yes.
And second by,
Wendy.
who was that?
Wendy.
Wendy. Okay.
Yep.
Got a motion second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Okay, Elizabeth, so we'll move to the statement of necessity.
Thank you, Chairman. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 491-302, it is the duty of the State Board of Education to set policies for evaluating individual student progress and achievement, evaluating individual teachers, and measuring the educational achievement of individual schools. The Department of Education administered the new TN Ready assessment for grades 3 through 8 in 2016-17. In addition, the new TCAP Alt assessments were administered for grade 2 and grades 3 and 8 in high school. In order to complete the reporting of test scores, it is necessary for the State Board to adopt cut scores as soon as possible, which will be used to assign students to performance categories on the TCAP assessments. Because time is of the essence for the State Board to adopt the cut scores, this teleconference meeting was called to allow the board to review and approve the proposed cut scores, as well as review and approve other time-sensitive rules and policies. As members of the State Board reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for the purposes of the special called board meeting. As such, the State Board is meeting via teleconference to review the cut scores and other time-sensitive rule and policy revisions.
Okay, any questions for Elizabeth? Thank you.
No.
We'll move to the first reading item. Somebody, I believe, joined. Who has joined us since the roll call? This is Daryl Cobbins. Okay, Daryl, welcome. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move to the items on first reading, and what I'd like to do, without objection, combine items A and B and really address them as one item. They're dealing with basically the same subject. So, Teresa, if you could present that, and let's combine items A and B for your discussion and then also for the vote.
Good morning. On June 30th, the department convened a working group to review post-secondary readiness for students with disabilities. The working group identified some language in both the state rule and policy that is out of alignment with current law and state board rule. This language indicates that students with disabilities who fail to earn a yearly grade of 70% in a course that has an EOC examination may use the alternative performance-based assessment to add to their EOC score. The group also determined that the standards on this rubric are not aligned to current academic standards. In order to align with the high expectations that we hold for all students and to ensure equitable access to post-secondary opportunities for students with disabilities, we propose updating current high school rule and policy to remove the language around the use of the APBA. Removing this provision will align the policy with the requirement in state law and state board rule that TCAP scores be incorporated into a student's final grade. I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Okay, any questions for Teresa? Any questions? I think this, does align with the legislation that's out there, and it's really, for the most part, a cleanup of these items. Is there a motion that we approve on first reading, items A and D?
This
Yes,
is Wendy.
Gordon.
I'm at so move.
Okay, okay, the motion was by whom?
Wendy.
Wendy?
Wendy, and second by Gordon. Gordon, okay. Any discussion? Any questions, discussion? Okay, if not, Casey, if you could call the roll, please.
Mr. Ralston,
Aye.
Ms. Chansey, Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman,
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Ms. Tucker,
Aye.
Mr. Baucom.
Aye. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. We'll move to item C. Tammy, I believe you have that. Changes to math, English language arts, science.
Yes, thank you. So before you for consideration for first read, you have the non-substantive changes to the math, English language arts, and science standards. Based on input from the State Board of Education staff and working closely in collaboration with the standards writers, minor revisions were made to these three sets of standards. These revisions included typographical errors, punctuation, misspellings, inconsistencies, and formatting mistakes. The changes are non-substantive and do not materially alter these standards as approved originally by the State Board of Education. I would be glad to take questions or give examples if needed.
Okay, as Tammy noted, this is mostly a cleanup item. Is there any questions? Is there a motion to approve? So moved. Edwards moves to approve, second by
Hartgrove.
Second by Lillian. Okay, any questions or discussion? Okay, if not, Casey, if you could call the roll, please.
Mr. Ralston,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman,
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Ms. Tucker,
Aye.
Mr. Baucom.
Aye. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. We'll move to item D, English as a second language program policy. Jan, I believe you have this one.
I think I do. Thank you for allowing me the time to propose a few adjustments to the policy. The first goal is to clarify the ESL service requirements when the ELTs have reached a level when English proficiency and with academic proficiency to allow districts to move from that hour a day to service as needed for these students. We're proposing that we base this on the district being able to show that the student has made a minimum of a half year's growth and basing that on various criteria rather than on the WIDA access score alone. The training around this points out the necessity for adequate services for districts to see the growth needed for EL success, which feeds into the accountability measures. Moreover, success with English language acquisition is necessary for ELs to experience success with all of their educational goals. The other changes to this are to add definitions to long-term ELs, recently arrived English learners, and students with limited or interrupted formal education referred to as SLIFEs or SIFEs. The needed intervention for long-term ELs will be documented in the individualized learning plan, and there will be a special section of this plan for long-term ELs, and it will focus on the specific needs of the long-term EL. These needs are various for the success, and they must be differentiated for each student. I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, any questions for Jan?
This is Wendy. I have, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Wendy.
You sure? I missed you, Mike. You go first.
No, you might get my question a lot smarter, so you go.
I doubt it. Okay, well, I'll just move on. So thank you for adding the long-term learner. I know that was a conversation we had at that last meeting. My question is on the change with this showing of a half a year of growth. Is that change expected to result in more services for EL students or less services for EL students?
It's more tailored service because these children do better, or these students do better when they're in the academic classes if they can access that content, because they're being exposed to the academic vocabulary and academic content that they need. But we have to be careful that if they're at the cusp and not quite there, that we give them a little more service in a pullout or in a dedicated ESL classroom to make sure that they're building those skills to be able to access that content in the academic classrooms. And before we had set a hard and fast criteria, but as you remember, the WIDA cut scores had changed and we're not quite sure what they mean, and we're working with researchers this year to reset those. So it seemed inequitable to use the same, and I had a little pushback after the last meeting, it seemed inequitable to use those same scores we'd used before to determine that hour of service when districts were calling me and saying we can show other ways that they've gained that half year's growth.
So, I guess my concern at the last meeting was we dropped the cut score, right? And, you know, we can talk about the reasons all day long, but the reality is that moving forward, there has to be less showing of language proficiency to exit kids from EL services, right?
Not exactly, because the standards actually moved that test higher. So actually the standards are a bit higher at that 4.2 than they actually were at the 5.0. It's as equitable as we could come up with without having scores to compare. But it's actually the resetting of how those cut scores interacted with the standards that made that change.
Okay. But regardless, we lowered the cut score.
We lowered the numbers,
so
yes.
Right. And so I'm just trying to understand what this specific change is doing. It feels like this change is saying, even if you don't meet that now lowered number on the cut score, you can still reduce the direct EL services. Is that basically what's happening?
We have been allowing them after the intermediate level to tailor the services to the student. This would allow them to tailor services, but ask them to use not only WIDA access criteria, because we're a little iffy on what those are meaning right now, to use other criteria, whether that's benchmarking, whether that's classroom notes, whether that's grades, other formative assessments, to use a blend of criteria to make that decision. The goal is not to lessen the amount of service. It's to differentiate that service in a better way.
Okay, and I appreciate that, and I understand the goal. But my question is, this change will allow districts to lessen the direct services based on. Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand.
Not necessarily.
My reading of it.
Yeah, okay, and I understand where you're coming from now. Before, there was a hard criteria, so a student had to hit a 3.6 in order to be moved from that hour a day, 5 days a week. Which that 3.6, by today's research out of WIDA, is about a 2.6. But our policy, I didn't change that last time, and so it still stands at 3.6. Before, the students could have gone from a 3.5 one year to a 3.6, which is not much growth at all. Now they have to show more growth, and they're showing it from differentiated instruction materials and assessment materials. So it's not really lessening the standards, it's just setting them in a different way.
So they have to show that level of growth and be above the cut score? It's an and, not an or?
No, we have moved that 3.6 because that was set before on the old cut scores. We did not change that at the last state board policy meeting. This would just allow the districts more leeway in differentiating those services. Because a 3.6 now might do better in academic coursework with ESL support rather than with pull-out for ESL.
Okay, Mike,
First of all, my questions are going to be measured by the fact I wasn't there last time, and I apologize. So I'm going back far more rudimentary than where Wendy was. Are we saying that intervention occurs until at least half a year's improvement has occurred in reading?
No, we're saying that they are required to have an hour a day until they reach until they are at a point where they are gaining at least half a year. And at that point, the district makes that decision. But
okay, so what if they're 2 years behind?
Most of them are 2 to 4 years behind. So that's fairly typical. And the growth at the low ends of the scale is pretty rapid. They generally gain about a year at those levels 1s and 2s. But by the time they get up to the 3, 4, they're gaining much slower because the breadth of the material is wider. And those levels, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are they're not equal.
So when we're looking at not the lower years, but the higher years, and we've got our eye on the finish line.
Right.
And we're saying after a half-year improvement, we can walk away from this thing. We've done our minimum. That kid can graduate not being able to have adequate language skills to go on.
Because they still have to meet that exit criteria that we have set. So this is talking about English service hours, not exiting them from ESL. They would still have to receive ESL services, and they would still have to show growth. At this point, they might not be showing as much growth. And this is coming from a district perspective and some of the conversations I've had with districts. Maybe last year they were making what would be the equivalent this year of a 3.4, and this year they're at a 3.5 or a 3.6, and they're all of a sudden out of an hour a day. And clearly, if they're not growing more than that, they need the hour a day. But if they're growing more rapidly and they're benefiting from their academic classes, then perhaps that's the better placement for them. So it would take more analysis from the ESL professionals and the classroom professionals in the districts, but it would be more differentiated for the students.
So again, everything I'm talking in context of is playing this thing out at up until and through graduation day.
Okay,
So if, would you say, or can we say that that the cut scores at where we're putting them align with walking in post high school training? Ready.
the exit scores or how we're differentiating that hour a day compared to tailored services?
Well, one leads to the other, but is the exit score equal to what post high school training needs to be successful?
I believe so,
Okay.
yes, I believe so, and we will be
How do
continuing to do
we measure that?
We measure that with the composite score on the WIDA Access and with the literacy score on the WIDA Access. And they're relatively high. I hear from districts that many of their other students can't, many of the native born students would struggle with this. We have our cut scores relatively high because there are other factors that go into this. And I totally understand if you have concerns and we need to table this for the next meeting. I understand that.
No, I want to make sure, Mike Krause sits on this board. If we were to ask Mike, is this a good indicator that our high school graduates, when they walk into a Tennessee post high school training, are prepared to succeed? Because we're looking at a whole lot of numbers where they're not ready to succeed. And there's a whole lot of numbers, and it's not, I know we're talking about ESL right now, but it really goes to the heart of everything. If we're looking at what districts are telling us, are we also asking what post high school is telling us?
I believe we are, and we will continue to research that. Tennessee has one of the lowest rates of long-term English learners in the country, and we have some of the highest standards for exiting English learners into the academic population.
Yeah, this is Candace McQueen, and Mike and certainly Chairman Ralston. I would be open to tabling this if that feels right, and we're happy to come back at the next board meeting and do a deep dive on some really significant data we have on ESL that should be shared with you that I think you would appreciate, and we certainly have not shared that with you to date, but we want to make that public, so our state board meeting would be a great meeting to share that at the next time we meet face to face. So Sarah or Chairman Ralston, I would offer that up as a possibility.
And Chairman, I would defer to you, but it does seem like this could be one that might benefit from some face-to-face discussion. So we'll leave that decision to you based on the discussion today.
Okay, or I think the other option would be to approve on first reading, realizing we've got a second reading coming, and we could have some of that discussion associated with that second reading. So let's, is there a motion that either we postpone or approve on first reading?
So Mike, or Chairman, this is Wendy. May I ask you a question? This was initially done on first and only reading last time, so I think this would still be right. This would be implemented. We wouldn't have another reading.
No, this is only
No.
first reading. Right?
That's correct.
Yes, right now it's up as first reading.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is just first reading at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, so I'm happy to make a motion, but I get what, just for my purposes, I appreciate what the department's trying to do here and differentiate and support the students. And so if we feel like this needs to move forward and then we can take a deeper dive, I'm fine with that too. I would like to follow this closely because I think the intent is great, and I just have some concerns around like just how to implement it. But I don't want it to appear that I don't think you guys are doing this for the right reasons at all. So whatever the chairman thinks we need to do, I'm happy to do.
Okay, well, I guess I would lean toward going ahead and approving on first reading and saying we're going to come back and have these additional in-depth discussions for second reading. But also, if there's a motion to postpone, entertain that. So, do we have a motion?
I move that we go ahead with first reading.
Okay, Mike makes a motion that we approve on first reading. Is there a second? Second. Second, is that Gordon? Hayden. Hayden, okay. If we will, when we make the motion, identify who's making it so we can get that in the minutes. Okay, any additional discussion? Okay, if you could call the roll, please.
Mr. Ralston.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman.
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ms. Tucker. Ms. Tucker. Mr. Balcom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the ayes have it. We will approve, we have approved on first reading. I think good discussion. We will plan to make sure that we have an in-depth review of the items listed there.
Hi, it's sorry, it's Lindy. I was booted off, so I don't know if I missed that vote or not.
Did you vote aye?
Oh, it wasn't a roll call. No, I would have. I gotten disconnected. I'm sure it was accidental.
Okay, we will count yours as an aye vote,
Yes,
in,
thank you.
for the roll call. Thank you. We will now move to, action items on final reading. First item A, I believe the list, if you have that.
She's moving to the microphone.
Good morning. This is to bring the final reading of the adult education rule, which adjusts the funding for adult education programs to come in line with funding for adult high schools. And I will answer any questions that you all have.
Okay, any questions for Elizabeth? Okay, is there a motion to approve on final reading?
This is Gordon, so moved.
Okay, Gordon makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Lillian.
Lillian makes a second. Any discussion, questions? Okay, call the roll, please, Casey.
Mr. Ralston.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Weissman.
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ms. Tucker.
Aye.
Mr. Balcom.
Aye. Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is approved. We'll move to item B, the LEA alternative salary schedule for Memphis or Shelby County Schools. Paul or Sylvia, who has that?
This is Sylvia Flowers. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have before you an alternative salary schedule proposal from Shelby County Schools. You will see that the district is moving to a single lane salary schedule where performance will determine base pay increases. You see before you the levels of performance and the amount of raises that educators will receive. They also provide for many other opportunities for educators to earn additional compensation through advanced degrees, other bonuses, and hard to staff incentives. And I'm happy to take any questions on Shelby County Schools' alternative salary schedule.
Okay, any questions for Sylvia? Sylvia, one question I had was just briefly, what schedule did Shelby County Schools have before this? Did they have the standard time and grade or time and service and education, or are they coming from something else?
They actually were approved for an alternative salary schedule 3 years ago, where they were requiring advanced they were no longer recognizing advanced degrees. So we had already approved them for a single lane salary schedule. The performance-based criteria was not part of their previous salary schedule, which had been approved by the state board.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, other questions for Sylvia on item B? Okay, is there a motion to approve on final reading?
Mike Edwards, aye.
Okay, Mike, motions, is there a second?
Second, Hartgrove.
Second by Lillian. Any discussion, question? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mr. Ralston,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Weissman,
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Ms. Tucker,
Aye.
Mr. Balkum.
Aye. Okay, the ayes have it, the motion is approved. We'll now move to item C, the standard setting for grades 2 through 8, basically. Nakia has that, and this, as you will recognize, is kind of the centerpiece of the reason for this meeting today. So I guess we'll take a little bit more time with it. You do have a PowerPoint that was delivered this morning to your email that may be helpful in following Dr. Towns' presentation. Dr. Towns.
Actually, I'm going to start, Chairman. This is Candace McQueen. I'm going to make a few opening and closing comments, but we are going to get through all of these slides in 20 to 25 minutes. So we're committed because we certainly want a time for questions. But very, very quickly, as we go to the overview, this is what we're going to be talking about on our call today. There we go. The timeline for 2016-17, our assessment life cycle, we wanted to share where standard setting fits into that, which ultimately led to our cut score recommendations, and then our reporting, and then we'll take questions. As we finalize 2016-17, we've had some key milestones. At our last state board meeting, you were part of our high school EOC state release in July, and then we moved very quickly to getting all of this data out to our districts. It's been on embargo, but will be publicly released next Wednesday. We are now moving forward with our standard, we've moved forward with our standard setting process already for grade 2, grade 3-8, and TCAP alt for social studies and science. And we are at the phase now to move that toward our reporting, which is dependent upon finalizing our cut scores today. Just a reminder of where we are in the assessment life cycle. I think this slide tells the story. There's a lot that goes into actually the creation of the assessment and where the star is. Just like if you were in the mall looking at a map, this is where we are. We're finalizing cut scores, and then we'll be moving towards score reporting in the technical reports for grade 2, grades 3 through 8 in all of our subject areas and grade levels, as well as our alt assessment. So let me turn it over to Dr. Towns. She is going to go through the standard setting process and then share the cut score recommendations with you.
So for those of you who were members of the state board last year for high school EOC, this should look familiar, but I did want to remind everyone of the process that we go through to arrive at these recommendations that we are putting forth for your consideration today. The standard setting process is one where we bring in educators to help us identify the relevant knowledge and skills that needs to be taught at each content area to determine the performance level of the student. We are going to have those recommendations come from the standard setting panels that's a qualitative content expertise view. And then we take those recommendations at the department, apply some quantitative analysis, consult with other content experts, and that's how we arrive at the recommendations for your consideration today. So moving to the next slide, the performance level descriptors have been rewritten in anticipation of our transition to TN Ready for last year in 2015-16. As we think about grade 3-8, we have the 4 performance levels. The new names that we've updated for grades 3 through 8, we're going to include the grade level reference. So the highest level is level 4, mastered grade level. And then we have level 3, which is on grade level. Those are considered our old proficient advanced. And then the next level, level 2, is approaching grade level. And then the lowest achievement descriptor is below grade level. So as a reminder, we developed the performance level descriptors starting with the policy PLDs, and then we have educators participate in narrowing those to the range performance level descriptors. And then we have the threshold descriptors at standard setting, which help them determine when a student moves from one level over to the next. And then finally, the reporting PLDs are what we share on the reports that go home. So in thinking about those policy PLDs, we want to remind you of the language and the stake that we put in the ground around the high expectations that we have for students. I'll start with level 3, which is now our on grade level performance. So performance at this level, we have said as a state that a student who performs at the on grade level has a comprehensive understanding and thorough ability to apply the grade and course level knowledge and skills defined by our academic standards. So that is a very strong statement around what we expect for students to be able to know and do for us to consider them to be on grade level. When we get to the highest level, we really extend that to say that students have an extensive understanding and expert ability to apply. So I want you to keep that in mind as we look at the cut score recommendations and the potential results for our statewide data for our students. Moving to the next slide, you see we've defined level 2 and level 1, and there you see that for approaching, students are going to have a partial ability to apply the grade level standards, and then level 1 is a minimal understanding and nominal ability to apply. So I want this graphic on the next slide, slide 12 is where we are right now, shows you that we define 3 cuts to determine 4 levels. And so what we had our educators do is think about what would a student need to be able to demonstrate in order to move from the level 1 into the level 2. And they define that as the first cut score. And then the second cut score determines a student moving from approaching to on grade level. And then the final cut moves a student to the highest performance level. That process that we used is called the bookmarking process. We've been using the bookmarking process for over a decade in Tennessee. This is widely accepted and used for many states and many standardized assessments to set cut scores. And in that process, what we do is show teachers the actual test items that students experience, and we arrange those test items in an ordered item booklet that goes from least to most difficult. And then what we ask educators to do is to consider at what point would the demonstration of skill that's represented by that item transition that student to the next performance level. So in moving to the next slide, literally we ask teachers to bookmark exactly where they think that point is in the transition. And so each of the panelists in our standard setting set that bookmark, and that's how we use their determinations based on their content expertise and based on our policy level, performance level descriptors to determine the cut score recommendations that came from the panel. We had several panels that we needed to convene in July for the various tests that we're presenting cut scores for today. So we had one panel for grade 2, they considered both ELA and math. And then we had a grade 3-5 ELA and math panel and a grade 6-8 ELA and math panel. And there were 16 to 18 members of each of the panels. They represented all the geographic areas across the state, and they represented the diversity of the teacher workforce in terms of race, gender, and role. So we did collect feedback from our panelists, and we got a good response rate from them, and they were generally positive about the experience and in agreement around their panel recommendations. So I included a few slides that just give you some quotes from open-ended questions that we asked our panelists. Those open-ended questions were basically their reflections on the overall process, what they think they took away from the process, what they want families and other educators to know about TN-Ready. And I think the recurring theme is that teachers on the panels wanted us to be sure to understand that the standards are higher and the expectations are higher, and that students need to not only be able to just demonstrate a skill, but they have to be able to apply it in context. I won't read these. I'll leave these for you to ponder. We'll go to the next slide. I think the key takeaway here is to get to the cut score recommendations given what the panel reflected upon and how they participated in the process. So let's move to the details of the recommendations. What I want to remind us of is that this is a new baseline for us in Tennessee. This was a new test for grade 3-8, as well as our TCAP alt test and our new optional grade 2 test. And it aligns with the more rigorous standards that we adopted. So this is a more challenging test. And this means that we expected and prepared for that our scores would be lower in the short term. However, we do know, as we've done in the past in Tennessee, that when we raise expectations, students and educators rise to that new level of expectation. So we need to be sure that we understand that these scores represent progress towards equipping our students to be successful after high school, and that's what we need to stay focused on. So in thinking about the cut score recommendations, we really have considered the journey that we've been on in Tennessee since 2007, when the U.S. Chamber of Commerce gave us an F for truth in advertising. You all will recall that our historical TCAP test represented or reported that 90 to 95% of our students were proficient. And that was a large gap with what we would see with other performance data like NAEP. Now we're closing that disconnect with NAEP and with ACT, SAT benchmarks. So we're going to ensure that TN Ready is a better indicator of student progress towards college and career readiness. So just to give you a sense of where we were in 2015, which was our last administration of our grade 3-8 test, we're showing you the TCAP grade 3-8 students who were proficient and advanced in 2015. That's the first bar, the blue bar. And then we're showing you comparison data where we look at NAEP grade 4, which NAEP grade 4 is really K4 content. NAEP grade 8 is 5-8 content. And then we have the ACT Explore, which was for 8th graders. And you remember that we participated in that in the last year of that assessment in 2015. And what you can see is that in reading, we were reporting that about 48% of our students in 2015 were considered proficient or advanced. And then when we look at the other national benchmarks, you saw that number that was closer to a third of our students. And then when you see for math, we were about 56% on our TCAP grade 3 through 8. And then you see the national benchmarks that show that that was more of 35% or so of our students were at that national benchmark. So with that in mind, we completed concordance studies. This is exactly what we did on last year with high school EOC, because we wanted to provide a quantitative complement to the qualitative review that our panels had completed. And so in moving to the next slide, we actually had a great deal of information for grades 3 through 8 to build concordance studies. We did use NAEP data, we did use Explore data, and we also looked at our SAT-10 results for grade 2 comparison. And so we are at the place where we want to share with you the recommendations from the TDOE, and we want to make sure that you understand the impact data that we're sharing is really preliminary. This is not accountability results, but it gives you a sense of what our statewide performance would look like based on these cut score recommendations. So for English language arts, let us just move into, and I'll talk through, let's get to the chart that actually shows the recommendations. You all know that we had the cover memo where we talked about some of the drivers of our recommendations. But I want to orient you to the actual data for the cut scores. So you see a column that's labeled cut, and that is the actual scale score recommended cut from the TDOE, and that is the cut score associated with each performance level. So you see the cut score that a student would need to move to level 2, the cut for level 3, and the cut for level 4. In addition, we looked at what we call that CSIM is the conditional standard error of measurement. And what that does is give us a view towards anchoring on the panel recommendations. But if there is an adjustment that we needed to make, we follow that standard error of measurement and try to stay within the confines of what the panel recommended. And you'll recall that for EOC, we made some pretty large adjustments from the panel recommendations in order to moderate the rigor of the expectations. And this year, some of the adjustments that we've made are actually much smaller than what we experienced last year. So I'll take you to the final column that says level 3 and 4. This is the on grade level and mastered level, which would be equivalent to our old proficient and advanced. And you can see that the cut score recommendations that we've made generally reflect that 30 to 35% of our students would be considered on track and mastered. In grade 4, we anchored pretty closely to the NAEP cut scores. And in grade 8, we anchored pretty closely to the Explore college readiness benchmarks in alignment with our ACT scores. In general, for ELA, we saw that we were needing to make some adjustments to reflect the rigor of our expectations versus what some of the panel recommendations were originally. So that's the ELA summary. So let's advance and let's talk about math. So I'll get to the math table, and similarly, let's orient you to math. This looks very similar to what we just saw for ELA, and we went through the same process in terms of looking at the scale score cuts based on the panel recommendations, and then making some small adjustments. We will say that for the math panels, they were definitely recommending cut scores that were more rigorous than 2015 TCAP, but slightly less rigorous at some grade levels than our NAEP or Explore college readiness benchmarks would indicate. So again, if you look at the final column, you see that the TDOE recommendations show student performance in the 40% range in elementary grades, but consistent with what we see as the math gets more difficult in those middle grades, and we start to ask students to do more complex algebraic expressions, we see a decline in student performance. So we are going to be working on that and working on the critical foundational skills that we need for students to master in those elementary grades to be able to do that more complex math. So let me move from there to talking about TCAP Alt. I want to remind you all that our TCAP Alt assessment is designed for our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And this generally represents about 1% of total enrollment in our state, which means that less than 1,000 students take the Alt assessment compared to 60 to 70,000 students who take TN Ready. This means that there's greater cohort variation, as you can imagine, the range of disabilities that might be experienced. And because of that, we have a smaller number of questions in the ALT program, which we think is developmentally appropriate, but we also adjusted to have 3 performance levels based on the recommendation of our technical advisory committee, because we do want to make sure we have enough information to reliably report those 3 performance levels. So let me move into a little bit of information about the standard setting for ALT. We also had panels there. For grade 2, we used ELA, looked at ELA and math, consistent with the grade 2 gen ed assessment. And for grade 3-5, I'll remind you that we participate in the MSAA assessment for ELA and math for our ALT students. So this was for the ALT test was for social studies and science for our TCAP ALT. So I'm going to move forward in terms of some of these background slides about the ALT test and really let's keep moving forward to look at let's stop here and talk about the differences in the performance level descriptors. I want to orient you to the fact that for ALT, we have different performance levels, the 3 performance levels, and we wanted to make a change from what we've done historically, which we had the same labels for the performance levels, which I think could have been a little misleading for some of our stakeholders around the differences in the ALT assessment. And so now for these 3 performance levels, the highest level that for a student in the TCAP ALT is level 3. And we note that a student at this level has a broad understanding of the knowledge and skills defined by the Tennessee Alternate Assessment Standards. This is a subset of our gen ed standards that's appropriate for this population of students. At level 2, that's a student who has a developing understanding, and level 1 is an emerging understanding. In the next slide, I wanted to put the continuum so that you understand how our special populations team and our special educators should think about the ALT performance levels in comparison to the TN Ready performance levels. And so you would consider that the highest level on the ALT assessment, level 3, is still below the mastery level of grade level standards that are demonstrated by TN Ready level 1, the below grade level. So just want to give you that context. So let's move in looking into the alt assessment. We did concordant studies for grades 3A based on the MSA exams, and so we'll look at the results. For grade 2, we actually didn't have any concordance information, and what you see represented here is the recommendation of the panel that the TDOE is also putting forth. So the final column, as we noted in the previous slides, is the level 2 and 3. This is what we would consider the proficient set of students, and you can see that for grade 2 ELA, that recommendation is about 55%, and for math, about 57%. This is consistent with grades 3A. Let's look at social studies, and we'll get into the social studies details. And so here, again, based on MSAA, we made a couple of adjustments to the concordance based on the concordance tables. But you see that generally in alignment with our MSAA results, we have about 40 to 50% of students who are considered proficient on the ALT assessment. And then moving into talking about science, where we also have the high school science course. Again, we did a concordance study with MSAA, and we made slight adjustments in the 6th grade level and the 8th grade and high school level. And you see that we generally have about 50 to 60% of students who are considered proficient on the science recommendations. And then you notice a little bit of a dip with the cohort in grade 6, and we saw that as well in MSAA, and we believe that's that cohort variation that we talked about across the ALT assessment. So from there, let me turn it back over to Commissioner McQueen to reflect on some of the recommendations.
Yes, let me have some closing comments, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We believe these recommendations are a better indicator of progress toward readiness. We have set a high bar, as we did last year with high school, and we're also making sure that we have a more accurate picture of where we are with our students. Are they truly on grade level? Are they truly on track? And are they truly ready for what's next after high school? We want our families and our students to know that they should not be discouraged by this. We're not going backwards. We're actually now going forward with a fuller picture of the high bar that we've set for our students. We are also continuing to be thoughtful with our directors. We actually have a advisory group right now on how TN Ready will fit into our students' grades now and going forward, and we've appreciated the board being part of those conversations. And a reminder, like last year with our high school test, this is a reset moment for grades 3A, and we know that we continue to frame that this is just one picture, one feedback loop. It's a unique feedback loop, but it's a way for us to get information around what do we need to do to improve, whether we're an educator, whether we're a student, or whether we're a family supporting a student. And we believe these scores do not mean it's a student's destiny, but it's a very important moment in time to step back and say, is this child on track, and what can we do to better support readiness for the student? I'm going to stop there. We have some additional slides that have reporting information, just what our reports look like. You've seen these before, but we wanted to include them again. If you want to review where we're moving with our 3-8 tests, they will have the same types of reports that we have provided for high school. And with that, we will open it up to questions.
Okay, Nikita and Candace, certainly appreciate the presentation and the recommendations. You know, I want to encourage board members to go through this in a more leisurely manner to understand. I think this presentation is really important and is very significant to the work of the board. I just wish that we had the opportunity to go through this in a workshop presentation where we had, you know, probably a couple of hours or so to work through the information that's been presented. Unfortunately, that's not the case, so we may want to come back with this presentation at a workshop to give board members a better opportunity to understand what all is contained here. Are there other questions for Candace or Dr. Towns?
This is Wendy. I just have a few, shockingly.
Okay.
Are you ready? Okay. First, I want to thank you, Dr. Towns, for taking the time to talk to me about this prior to today, which is why I only have a few. And these are just, I don't think these are terribly complex. But my first question is on the ALT. How is that reported? Is that reported on the report card in a separate place, or is that not on the report card for schools?
we actually integrate our alt results into the accountability results that you see. So essentially that level 2 and level 3 is considered equivalent to our on track and mastered for the purposes of the alt students. So when we report out our state results, district results, and school results, the alt assessment results are included in that. So they're represented as part of the overall student population. And of course, parents get their own individual report around the alt results. We're finalizing the design of that report. It's been very important to us that make sure that we include diagnostic information that says to parents how their students are doing beyond just the numbers of the alt assessment. So we are in the process of finalizing that design, and we'll also release and post and provide parent guides around the alt report as we've done for our gen ed reports.
Okay, so for example, my daughter takes the alt, so her score, if she scored a 3 on the alt, that would just at the school level, that would be incorporated into the 3-4 level for that school. Is that what you're saying? Is that
absolutely? So when I report out a school's on track or mastered, the 1% or so of those students who are taking the alt assessment, they're included in that report. We don't separate that. We put it in. It's a part of the overall assessment results for that school.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So 2 more questions. One, I know that schools received their raw scores a while back, right? Like right after the test. What does I mean, for people who aren't like math statistics, what's the difference between the raw scores and scale scores?
So yeah, that's not a quick answer, and I'm going to try to see if I can make it a quick answer. Raw scores are literally just, if you think about a regular classroom assessment, it's just telling you did they get the question right or wrong, right? So just very straightforward. And so we provide that information to schools and districts simply for the purposes of the report card. We do not use raw scores in any form for accountability reporting or for TLAWS data. In order to get to scale scores, this is where we apply a process that we call equating, where we figure out between test forms and administrations, what is that consistent scale score that is comparable even as we change the test and we're making the same type of judgments based on the same scale in terms of the rigor and the performance of students. And so we call, and the psychometric process is called the item response theory, which is how you convert a raw score into a scale score. And I will not go into that in detail today. Yes, exactly. So, but what we do then is take those raw scores using item response theory, we translate those to scale scores, and the scale score cuts are what are consistent from year to year. In any given test form or administration, the raw score, the equivalent raw score could change. It's the scale score cut that remains constant, and that's how we know we have an apples to apples comparison from year to year around student performance.
Okay, so the scale scores is like when you implement the curves, I guess, for those of us who simplify this stuff.
I actually don't think that's a curve. You probably are thinking about the quick score being a curve to convert it to a 100-point grading scale. A scale score is something very different. I'll say, like, when we tell you ACT scores are on a scale from 1 to 36, ACT has something like 225 questions, right? So that's not, the 1 to 36 scale score is not a simple conversion of the number of questions the students got correct. So what most people hear and think and talk about in any given period with a standardized assessment, they're talking about the scale score. Most people don't even know the raw score beneath it, but we're transparent in terms of we're giving the public the raw scores, and we actually do publish for districts and schools the raw score to scale score conversion table for each administration, so they know the conversion beneath that. But frankly, when you talk about standardized assessments, you only should be talking about scale scores because that's the only comparable measure.
Okay, and then one more question. Were you able to see any trends or anything that you could share with us related to performance on the test with subgroups?
No, I will tell you we haven't done any of that analysis. So unless and until we get to the place of adopting cut scores, then we will start in earnest all of that analysis. And that's why we gave the caveat today that what you're seeing is just raw impact data. And we haven't taken a look at any particular district, school, or subgroup information, and we haven't applied any of our accountability business rules. However, once we get to finalize cut scores, we will quickly start all of that process, and we will begin to communicate with the public about our performance and the subgroup distinctions that we always do for our state assessment program.
Great. And then, well, I lied. One more question. The school level data is expected to be public right around when the report card comes out in November. Is that correct?
Yes, later this fall. So we'll be giving you an updated timeline. Once we have these the cut scores finalized, we will work with our vendor to get a timeline that we can publish. But certainly it would be no later than the report card, and we would do the same type of process that we've done before. We would release state level data before we then share information with schools and districts before we make their school and district level data public.
And Dr. Towns.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and can you share for the group, because I've had this question from one of you, TVOS is coming out earlier.
Yes.
So we will get 3.8 TVOS before they will get the actual scores.
No, that's exactly right. So just to make sure, the distinction, as we've said, TVOS is actually a growth measure, and it is not dependent upon the achievement cuts. So we have had the data and have shared it with SAS around our overall scale score results, and that's what they use to determine the TVOS levels. So we actually will start sharing TVOS data with districts on next week in terms of school level TVOS, and then right after Labor Day, teachers will have their teacher level TVOS evaluation composites. So that data will be shared with schools and districts and educators in advance of any public communication about achievement data. And that's for all grades, K-12, right. Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Yes, this is Lillian. I just have a couple of comments and one question. I greatly appreciate the vast amount of work that has gone into getting us to this point and arriving at these cut scores. I know that schools and parents are eagerly waiting for this information. And I believe you said this will be released on Wednesday, the embargo, once we vote.
No, I'm sorry. That's for high school EOC. I want to be clear that the Wednesday information will just be the high school EOC results for last year. We are still, that was what Wendy was referring to when she talked about the November report card timeframe. That's when the public will see the grade 3-8 results. So we haven't yet started to determine the accountability reports for grades 3-8 until we have final cut scores.
Okay, and then my question for Commissioner McQueen, because you said this in your closing remarks, and I appreciate this because I know parents could easily be discouraged. Individual students could be individually discouraged. Do you all have a plan for communicating or issuing a letter that would go out to parents? What's the plan for making sure they know that they should not be discouraged and that we're moving the needle in the right direction? Can you respond to that?
Sure. We actually did a similar version to this last year when we put out information. Last year we had like letters with the score reports that explained the new baseline and what that means. We would do a similar version of that this year with 3.8 when those score reports are ready. And we also did some translations into multiple languages. So we were really getting a full spectrum of what parents' needs were in this area to make sure they understood what it means, how they can use it, and particularly how they can then go back to the score report and see what students' strengths are and what areas of improvement that they should be focused on as they talk to their students.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Other questions?
Let me just tag on to this is Mike Edwards, what Candace just said, and to Lillian's point. This information is gold. And in the past, more in the distant past than in the recent past, parents couldn't really look and students really couldn't look at this data and know where they were at any one moment in time. Now they do. So I would say now's not the time to get discouraged. Now's the time to really figure out where you're at and how to get to where you need to be. Because first time or better at now than ever. So I applaud what the department has done.
Thank you, Mike, and I certainly want to agree with that statement. I think in a large respect, this is kind of a red letter day that we're seeing here. This really is a result of 10 years of work, hard work, the state board, the state department, and others to the standards to where they need to be. We've increased expectations. We've approved standards for these curriculums that we're talking about, and now we're setting cut scores that do, and I've pulled out the data and looked at it very carefully, find with NAEP and Explore, and I think this really is a significant step forward, and I really commend the department on this. I just wish we had more time to kind of absorb and recognize the importance of getting these cut scores set that we're working with here today. Okay, other questions?
Well, Chairman, this is Elisa. I echo all that. I agree, and you and your comments and Mike's comments. I mean, it's less questions. I mean, it is sort of tragic we don't have time to dive in. I have all kinds of questions. I mean, and we have no time. However, one thought is, I think one of the more striking things is, yes, reading all of this and remembering that we got an F in terms of truth and real accountability at one point. I think that we would rate very well. I don't know what the grade is, but it's certainly not an F. I would probably put us at, I'm guessing, A or B. I think that the next tranche, and this might be interesting to discuss in a future meeting, is just around what's on the current slide, on slide 48. We are being thoughtful about including TN ready and students' grades, because my experience in the district is that the reality is that this information comes out once. I agree with Mike. It is gold. It is very important, and we need it. It's also true that during the course of the year, people are really relying on students' grades as the measurement of progress. And in that sense, my guess is that we are not an A or B. My guess is that we're probably more like a D or F based on some of the things that I've seen. Anyway, I'm very interested in that conversation, is the alignment between, that we're consistent throughout the year with what we're telling parents, families, kids. And that consistency means making sure that we're very truthful about those grades in year, since this data only comes out once a year.
Okay, good comments.
Elisa, this is Sarah. I completely
other
agree,
comments?
and I think we'll have conversations with the department. I do think that will be a focus moving forward in terms of making sure, in terms of the aligned expectations across grading practices and sort of our end of year results.
Okay, is there a motion that we approve on final reading?
So moved, Mike.
Moved by Mike. Is there a second?
Second by Lillian.
Lillian seconds. Okay, additional discussion or questions? Okay, need to call the roll, please, Casey.
Mr. Ralston.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Weissman.
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ms. Tucker.
Aye.
Mr. Balkum.
Aye. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. Again, I would encourage state board members if you have this presentation that Dr. Towns just went through, to go through that and carefully and understand what all is there. And we will have an opportunity as we plan the workshop for our October meeting to have a more in-depth discussion of this, but I think it really, really is important and does, in my view, kind of finalize 10 years of work that we've been through with the State Board and State Department of Education. So a significant accomplishment. With that, let's move to item D, Tennessee History elective course, and I believe, Tammy, you're back up for that.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Yes.
just butt in here and Ms. Gordon? I've got to jump off this call to make a presentation at another meeting. Is that going to be a problem? We still have a quorum?
We still have a quorum, Gordon, and, the last item here is, I think, a pretty routine item, so not a problem.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Tammy?
Okay, great. At the July board meeting, the board approved a full set of social studies standards. Included in that full set of standards was a Tennessee history elective course. And of course, as y'all remember, those standards were to be implemented in the school year 2019-2020. Given the high demand for this Tennessee history elective course at the high school, as well as the passage of the Senator Douglas Henry Tennessee History Act, the department would like to recommend that we move the implementation of this Tennessee History High School elective course up to January of 2018. In doing this, this will allow more students across the state to be able to take and utilize this Tennessee History elective course. And it will also allow our districts not to have to go through this special course request in order to offer an elective course for Tennessee history. So we would like to recommend moving the implementation date of this elective course up to January 2018.
Okay, any questions? Is there a motion to approve on final reading?
So moved. This is Mike.
Mike moves. Got a second by
Hayden, second.
Hayden. Thank you, Hayden. Okay, any questions or discussion? Okay, Casey, if you could call the roll, please.
Mr. Ralston.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Weissman.
Aye.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ms. Tucker.
Aye.
Mr. Balkum.
Aye. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. Certainly want to thank everybody for being on this call. As I said earlier, it's a more extensive conference call than we will plan to have in the future, but certainly appreciate your attendance. Do want to remind everybody that we do have another conference call, and I promise it'll be shorter, for September the 20th, and then a regular meeting we will have in Knoxville on October the 20th. Hope that everybody has that on their account. So with that, unless there are additional comments from anyone, the meeting is adjourned.